Today I'll show you Passengers, a 2016 sci-fi, romance, and drama film. Take precautions and exercise caution. The interstellar spaceship Avalon can be seen traveling through space on its way to Homestead 2, a colonized world. The ship's quarters are all empty, and it's on autopilot. The 258 crew members and 5,000 passengers have gone into hibernation. The ship suddenly passes through an asteroid belt, weakening its shields. The ship's power is diverted to the main shield, but it is on a collision course with a massive asteroid. The asteroid collides with the ship unexpectedly, causing various malfunctions. The ship starts self-repairs, but one of the hibernation pods wakes up. Jim Preston, a mechanical engineer, is the awakened passenger. His pod opens, and an automated system assists with his awakening, informing him that he has been suspended for 120 years and that the ship is only 4 months away from Homestead 2. He is told that he will be able to spend that time enjoying the ship's luxurious features. Prior to his arrival on the planet, Jim receives instructions about his ID band, his cabin, and the primary activities he will participate in. He gets ready, leaves his cabin, and walks into an automated class meant for an entire learning group, excited and nervous to meet the people on the ship. Jim appears concerned as the hologram describes the situation on Earth, describing it as overcrowded, overpriced, and overrated. It tells him to wait until the end of the lesson to ask questions, but Jim keeps asking why he's the only one there. He realizes the hologram cannot respond to him and goes in search of other people. He makes his way to the ship's main concourse. There is no one there either, but an automated informational desk offers assistance. When Jim requests to speak with a real person, he is directed to a steward, but when he discovers that no one is present, he requests to speak with the captain. When he arrives at the bridge, he notices that none of the main crew is awake, despite the fact that he does not have access to go inside. Jim eventually visits the observatory and discovers that the ship is 90 years away from Homestead 2. He realizes he awoke too soon and rushes back to the concourse, where he sends a message to Earth asking what he should do because he doesn't know how to return to hibernation. The communications system informs him that the overpriced call to Earth will take 55 years to receive a response. Jim is heartbroken. He walks around and comes across the ship's bar, where he notices another person. As he's talking to the bartender, something seems strange about him. Jim realizes he's an android when he goes to get him a drink. It's known as Arthur. Jim wants to get more information from him, but he can't even explain to the android how he can be there ahead of time. The next day, Jim wakes up in his cabin and goes to the cantina, where he quickly realizes that most of the items on the menu are only available to gold-class passengers. He sips his plain coffee while attempting to repair his hibernation chamber. He manages to get it running after gathering all of the tools and lies down inside the pod. However, nothing happens. He then decides to use the tools he discovered to gain access to the crew's hibernation chambers. That also does not work. Small malfunctions occur throughout the ship. Jim keeps going back to the bar, mostly to talk to Arthur. The android gives him some advice, which persuades him to break into one of the gold class rooms and have some fun on the ship. Jim tries every restaurant, game, and entertainment system, but as time passes, he grows increasingly dissatisfied with being alone. He gets drunk one day and wanders around the hibernation pods until he comes across an airlock with spacesuits designed for spacewalks. Jim dons a suit and goes to the airlock, where he pushes a lever and then a button to open the airlock door. He's taken aback by the view once he steps outside the ship. He is the only conscious human being present at that point in time. Jim lets go of the magnets on his boots and floats in space, devastated. He returns inside, removes the suit, and returns to the airlock without it. He pulls the lever, ready to end it all, but then changes his mind, runs back inside, and slips on a bottle. Jim stands up and is immediately drawn to Aurora, a woman in one of the pods. He searches the directory for her files and listens to her passenger interview, falling in love with her. He was later seen sitting next to her pod, still listening to her interviews. Back in the bar, he's reading some of her work and discussing it with Arthur. He becomes obsessed with the irony of his situation, traveling to another planet in search of a better life, waking up early and failing to arrive, and finding his ideal woman only to find her out of reach. Jim continues to think about her and begins to consider waking her up as well. He discusses it with the android, but he doesn't understand the problem. If he wakes her up for his own benefit, he will be stranding her on the ship to die. Jim initially decides against it, but as time passes, he can't let it go, until he changes his mind one day. He goes to her pod and successfully activates it. He hides and returns to his room as she awakens and goes through the same process he did. Later, he goes to the main concourse, hoping to find her. And there she is, as perplexed as he was a year ago. Jim informs her that they are the only ones awake and drives her to the observatory. Then he tells her that he can't reach the crew or the ship's main commands. Aurora panics and wishes to return to her pod. When they arrive, Jim informs her that there is no special equipment on the ship that can assist them in returning going to hibernation, effectively telling her that they are stranded. They return to the concourse, and he advises her to rest because she has just emerged from hibernation. She feels sorry for him because he has been alone on the ship for more than a year. Jim returns to the bar, feeling bad about what he did. He requests that Arthur not tell Aurora that he was the one who woke her up. Aurora finally wakes up the next day. She returns to the concourse and inquires about the hibernation pods at the automated information desk. Jim joins her, and they go out to breakfast. As they leave, the information desk malfunctions. Aurora realizes in the cantina that Jim has been eating the same breakfast for over a year and orders him one of the gold-class menus. They discuss the possibility of repairing the pods, but Aurora, unlike Jim, isn't ready to give up. She searches the infirmary, then research documents, before arriving at the crew's hibernation quarters and attempting to break the doors open. Jim discovers more flaws throughout the ship. Aurora laments her life on the Avalon sometime later. She writes, jogs around the ship, and swims in the pool, becoming increasingly aware of her predicament. She goes to the cantina to interview Jim because she thinks his story will be interesting. She inquires as to why he came to the colony. Jim responds with company slogans at first, but then goes on to say that he hopes to be somebody in the new world to build a life. Later, they arrive at the observatory, where Aurora finally reveals why she is there. She, unlike the other passengers on board, has a round-trip ticket. Her plan was to travel to Homestead 2, live there for a year, and then return to Earth, becoming the first journalist to do so and write the greatest story ever written. Aurora gradually gives up on finding a solution to their current predicament, and Jim devises a way to cheer her up. He takes her to the ballet, the movies, and the basketball court. Finally, he takes her to Arthur's bar. She unwinds for a moment before recalling their situation. Jim is left alone with the android, regretting what he's done to her. The next thing Aurora knows, he's tinkering with something, and she walks into the observatory to find a miniature of the Chrysler building he built for her. They go on a date at the bar later on. They eat dinner and tell each other stories about their lives. She explains that her father died when she was a teen. After dinner, Jim transports Aurora to the airlock, where they don their spacesuits. They embark on a spacewalk together. Jim now has someone to share his amazing experience with. Jim turns off the magnets in their boots, and they float in space together. They rush back inside, kiss, retreat to his cabin, and sleep together. Soon after, they begin to live as a couple. Aurora moves into his cabin and begins writing about her experiences on the ship. They go jogging, eat, and sleep together. Jim continues his exploration of the ship and discovers the hydroponics bay. He brings flowers to Aurora. The ship passes by a red giant one day, and they go to the observatory to see it. Aurora's birthday is later that night, so they celebrate in one of the ship's many restaurants and then the bar. While Aurora is in the bar chatting with Arthur, Jim goes to the restroom to prepare the ring he made for her. The android informs Aurora that Jim purposefully woke her up, unaware that he was still to keep that a secret. Jim reappears, and she confronts him in complete disbelief. She flees, enraged and terrified. When Jim returns to his cabin, he discovers that all of her belongings have vanished. The next day, he runs into her in the cantina, but the moment he speaks, she flees. Aurora is in a desperate situation. She goes over to Jim's cabin one night, punching and kicking him and threatening to kill him. Jim attempts to apologize and explain his actions to her over the comm because she continues to avoid him. He tells her he loves her, but Aurora is unconcerned. She is unable to forgive him for taking her life. Another malfunction occurs one night while Jim is in his cabin. When the ship encounters a critical error, the main command shuts down. Later, he enters the elevator, which malfunctions. Aurora enters the main concourse and notices Jim has planted a tree there. She then goes to the cantina, where the food dispensary is also broken. Suddenly, they both hear the deck chief's voice over the comms asking who planted the tree. They both dash into the concourse, where they see Gus Mancuso standing in front of Jim's tree. They introduce themselves and explain the situation to the chief. He doesn't see how 3 pods could fail. Mancuso takes them to the bridge and discovers that something is wrong with the ship, but the information on the systems must be manually checked. When they leave the bridge, a robot nearly falls on their heads, and the two of them inform Mancuso that malfunctions are becoming more common throughout the ship. He assures them that this will not happen as he demonstrates how to collect the dead. Jim joins Mancuso as he checks on the pods. He's discovered what happened to Aurora's pod. The deck chief regards Jim's actions as heinous. Later, while checking the collected data on the bridge, Aurora joins him. They talk about what happened with her pod, but he tells her he can't help her. Jim enters the room carrying the 16th broken robot. Mancuso feels sick from hibernation, so he goes to bed, but as he walks out, he coughs up blood. Jim joins Mancuso as he checks on the pods. He's discovered what happened to Aurora's pod. The deck chief regards Jim's actions as heinous. Later, while checking the collected data on the bridge, Aurora joins him. They talk about what happened with her pod, but he tells her he can't help her. Jim enters the room carrying the 16th broken robot. Mancuso feels sick from hibernation, so he goes to bed, but as he walks out, He coughs up blood. Aurora can't sleep that night, so she goes swimming. Suddenly, there is a loss of gravity throughout the ship, and she begins to drown as the water from the pool moves with her. The gravity drive is reset, and she barely escapes alive. They collide on their way to find Mancuso. They're all back on the bridge, slowly figuring out what's going on with the ship. Mancuso discovers that something happened 2 years ago, destroying a major system. They must determine and repair the source of the failure, as the entire ship is attempting to pick up the slack. If they do not repair it, the entire ship will be stranded. They go to investigate the problem, but Mancuso passes out. So Jim and Aurora take him to the hospital. He's dying, and there are no treatments that can stop it or extend his life. Later, the three of them meet in the observatory, and Mancuso hands Jim his ID bracelet, tells them to fix the ship, and then dies. The lights suddenly turn an alarming red, and the ship begins to shake. Jim informs Aurora that he requires her assistance, and they rush toward engineering, but the gravity drive fails again. And then there's another one that affects Arthur as well. Jim turns him off. They eventually make it to engineering and begin looking for the problem. They find it in the power plant, and Aurora is sucked in as they open the hatch. The asteroid has caused a hull breach in that area. Jim is sucked in as well, but he holds onto the hatch as it closes in on him. He eventually gets sucked in as well, but they quickly close the gap. After resolving that issue, Jim notices that there are multiple breaches in the hull. They track the meteor's path and discover that it collided with the reactor control computer. Jim believes he can locate replacement parts for it. They locate and replace the part, but the process of venting the reactor continues to fail. They try again manually, but it fails. Jim realizes that he must open the vent door from the outside of the ship in order to cool the reactor. They both go to the airlock, and as he prepares to leave, he hands Aurora Mancuso's bracelet to her because he may not return. She assists him with the suit and tells him to return as he walks into the airlock. She can't survive on the ship without him. Aurora returns to the reactor, where the temperature has reached critical levels. As Jim approaches the vent from the outside and notices the door, a bolt from the reactor propels into her arm. The temperature rises in the reactor room as he attempts to open the vent door. He soon realizes that he must manually hold the door open so that the reactor can vent, and he informs Aurora of this. She opposes the plan, but he goes ahead with it and instructs her to vent the reactor. She doesn't want him to die, and they argue, but he tells her that they must save the other people, so she blows up the reactor. The process is successful, but the reactor fumes push Jim away and break his tether. He tells Aurora what happened, and she rushes to find another suit and bring him in. He apologizes to her once more. She dresses up and flies out to find him, but her tether is too short. She's being dragged back, but she suddenly grabs his tether and pulls him in. Aurora drags Jim into the hospital, only to discover that he is already dead. She uses Mancuso's bracelet to bypass medical protocols and revive him. The medical pod automatically performs the procedure and revives Jim. Aurora accepts his apology. Aurora later repairs Arthur, and they give Mancuso a proper space burial. Jim brings her to the infirmary and informs her that he has discovered a way to use the medical pod as a hibernation pod. He instructs her to enter the pod and spend the rest of the journey inside. But, as it is later revealed, she declines and decides to remain awake on the ship with him. Jim eventually proposes to her, and they spend the rest of their lives on the ship. The Avalon arrives on Homestead 88 years later. The crew awakens to find the ship in an unexpected state. Aurora leaves them a message, telling them about her and Jim's time on the ship while the rest of them slept.